Let's speak now to Alan Mendoza, Exec Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Alan, just want your thoughts on this story first, because I know that you are also a Conservative councillor in Abbey Road in Camden. I mean, some might say, well, fair enough, if they've got to go and have meetings at the immigration office or whatever, and they don't have the money to get on the tube, then it's kind of important that they go to those meetings. But the risk is with these things, you know, the official statement from London Gov UK says they'll be given as little as $8.86 per week to cover all non-food costs. I have a feeling that's going to be the beginning price, isn't it?
That's obviously the thing that will need to be checked out here. It's going to be, how do you maintain a guide to what should be given out and what shouldn't be given out? Because if you leave it to discretionary spending, all you need is one officer who decides, oh, I'm going to give a lot of money out, and then before you know it, everyone is then put up to the same level, and you're spending a lot of money. I think no one begrudges basic needs here, but it's about how will this be enforced? How will it be carried through? What's the total budget that's going to be expended on it? Will that be extended? All these questions have been left unanswered, I think, by this sort of conversation right now.
Let's talk about Trump, because he won bigly, to use his own words. He smashed it, really, didn't he? It wasn't tight in the end at all. I think that people knew the writing was on the wall. By evening time in America, some people were astonished. Me, a little less so. I kind of thought that was going to happen. But it seems to me he's going to have complete control of the Supreme Court, Senate, Congress, a lot of it. So he's going to be extra Trumpy this time round. What do you think? I mean, you are Exec Director of an Anglo-American think tank. Do you welcome this? Are you looking forward to Trump 2.0?
I think everyone, I'm looking forward to this in the sense that I didn't think Trump won the foreign policy was bad. I thought it was very good. So from my perspective in the international relations world, I'm hoping that we're going to get a more resolute, stronger US foreign policy that makes a big key difference, particularly in regions like the Middle East, where I think we've gone backwards in the last 4 years rather than forwards. I also, recall that for all the fear about, Trump and NATO in round one, what ended up happening was that there was a lot of rhetoric, but in actual fact, NATO worked better because other NATO countries decided they were going to spend more money on their defence to equally burden share. So from that perspective, I'm also, kind of pleased that we'll be seeing the same, I would imagine the same thing. Of course, there is some trepidation because, Trump is unpredictable. So, you have to wonder, and I think the thing we should be looking out for is who is going to be in his cabinet. I think that'll give you a real steer as to what the second Trump term looks like. And if you have a certain collection of people who will be regarded as rather mainstream in their approach to international relations, then you'll get one outcome. And if you have some wilder and wackier figures, then it might be a bit more of a bumpy ride. So right now I'm cautiously optimistic and hopeful that, of course, the UK can take advantage of this to get some of our agenda done, and that collectively we stand together against the unfree world.
I mean, talking about that, I was speaking to Seb Gorka the other day in my own time. He used to be an advisor to Trump, and he said to me, he wouldn't give me a name, but he said to me there is a name floating around already in Trump camp about who the appointee to the UN could be, and it will make people's eyebrows shoot through the top of their heads. It's going to be a tough-talking person. And it made me think about the situation in the UN lately with Israel. And, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu seemed to be extremely delighted that Trump was going to be back in the White House. I think he sees a real ally there who's not going to have any truck with the games that Tehran likes to play. But Israel's had a blimmin' tough time with the UN. It seems to me that the UN has not listened whatsoever to any of the plights from Israel. I saw a really heart-moving speech from Miyashim, who is a returned hostage, talking about her time there, saying, why did the UN not stand up for us? Why did they never talk about the hostages? Do you think it's about time a Trump presidency goes to New York, goes to the UN as a member of the Security Council and says it's about time things were done a bit differently around here?
Did that in his first term, Alex, and that's the point that I think everyone's forgotten. The US under Donald Trump in the first term defunded the laughably named Human Rights Council of the UN, which of course has some of the world's greatest malefactors of human rights sitting on that committee. And the Trump administration went there and said, this is an absolute joke. if you're supposed to be about human rights, why do you have the greatest offenders sitting on the committee? And until you sort it out, we're defunding you. Thank you very much. So he's already shown in the past that he gets that the UN is a terribly corrupt organization and one that functions in this very piecemeal place where some of its agencies are very good, but others are absolutely atrocious. The Human Rights Council, UNRWA, all these sort of groups are no good at all, basically, in terms of delivering what the UN claims it's about. And I think the UN Secretary General has also got a big case to answer. Guterres has been, very hostile to Israel as a democracy, very sort of almost friendly, it would seem, to Hamas. Yes, he's condemned them, but his actions suggest otherwise. And, it lends itself to having someone from, a major power standing up. I mean, I wish Britain would do it, but we don't. I wish someone would come there and bang the drum and say, enough already. If the UN is going to recover any ability to act in this century, it needs to get its basic principles right. It needs to focus on, kind of effective delivery of services, get the politics out, and then maybe it's got a chance. And it needs someone very tough talking from the US to help deliver that.
Do you think, actually, that what we need now is an America who turns around and might say, well, the UN is, a rubbish organisation. It's not doing what it's supposed to do anymore. It's actually destabilising the world by not actually standing up to the bad in the world, and actually back Netanyahu to show a bit more aggression against Iran? There are people who say, well, if you go hard and heavy against Tehran, wow, this could create an even bigger conflagration. My gut feeling is if you go hard and heavy against Tehran, they haven't really got much to answer with.
Yes, I think your core contention is right. I think what's interesting is that Iran has been stripped bare in the last few months. Hamas has gone. Yeah. Hezbollah is seriously weak, and Hezbollah really was its cordon sanitaire. What the Iranians always had in reserve was, if you attack us, we will unleash Hezbollah on you. And I don't just mean in Israel, I mean around the world. Hezbollah had capabilities around the world to cause chaos. And instead, they've been decimated in a matter of weeks by the Israelis, which is a tremendous benefit, not simply to the local region, but also to everyone elsewhere who faced the threat of a Hezbollah sleeper cell being activated, all the rest of it. So Iran now, and then, of course, the Israelis showed they could strike at will within Iran, and that actually Iran's air defenses were non-existent, essentially, and that, things could happen. So what that shows you is that Iran is ripe for the taking. And again, let's not forget, Donald Trump pursued a maximum pressure strategy against Iran that was driving it towards bankruptcy in his first term. The Europeans failed to go along with it, and of course Biden sort of semi-reversed it, which is why the Iranians are breathing again. But he also took out the chief terrorist, Qasem Soleimani, in sort of an attack on the terror infrastructure of Iran, and Iran was reeling at the time. And once again, what you always see is that you've had presidents like Obama and Biden saving Iran at just the moment when Iran was teetering on the brink of going the right way, i.e., collapsing and being replaced by a better alternative. So it's less a UN problem here and more an issue of, can Donald Trump, if he wants to do this again, can he get not simply the Israelis to go along with it, but a few other powers and make a lasting difference in the Middle East? I think he can.
Do you reckon he'll get this government to go along with it in the UK?
Well, this is going to be the interesting challenge, isn't it? That the fascinating, sort of dance that's now happening between people who were quite happy to be very critical and frankly rude about Trump a few years ago, and now having to pretend they're his best friend. Now, in part, I'm not critical of that. That's diplomacy. The job of diplomats is to make amends for wrongs that may have occurred, basically. And I don't have a problem with David Lammy, for example, apologising or not, really getting on his knees to Donald Trump saying, look, forget about what I said. I'm actually here now. Let's work together. That's good. I want Britain to prosper under a Trump presidency. And part of that is going to be eating humble pie for the people who condemned him. Now, whether we'll go along with what the Americans want, that's an interesting question about what we might want in exchange. I've already, suggested that Trump is transactional in his approach to things. If he wants something and we want something else, do a deal. The man likes deals. Let's offer him a deal. If he wants to do this, we don't like the Iranian regime either. We don't really think it should stay there. If the price for that is, say, a trade deal or something else, let's go for it. Because, he's going to put tariffs on. We need to protect British goods and industry as well, services. So maybe there's a way of tying together what he wants and what we might want and coming to a grand bargain.
Do you know, I have a feeling, Alan, all of a sudden your think tank with the Trump regime is going to be a very important interlocutor between the UK and America. Talking about this government here, Sir Keir Starmer has been on the move today. He's been a busy boy. He's been talking about smashing the gangs and being part of big meetings over in Europe, laying out his plans for how he's going to do this. And has actually managed to strike deals within hours, has been the reports coming from Number 10, to work with Macedonia, Kosovo, countries like that, in order to share intelligence and try and stop the people trafficking routes as they come from that direction. It strikes me an awful lot don't always come from that direction, but up from that direction from Africa as well. I wonder how effective you think that's going to be in the grand scheme of things. But also, one thing that I've been looking into, and it's a sort of weird little subject that Alex likes researching, and the sort of weird little subject that Alan Mendoza is an expert in, which is Al-Qaeda in all of this. I mean, we're not going to talk about Southport for obvious reasons, but we know that that name was back in our headlines lately, and it seems that they've reformed, and from the research I've done, they're getting busy with involving themselves in a fair amount of human trafficking. And so when we're talking about smashing the gangs, we're not talking about working with a couple of countries where people might pass through. We're talking about dealing with some of the worst terrorist organisations in the world.
I mean, I think, you've asked two different things there. Firstly, I think it's great that the Prime Minister is getting, action on some of the chain migration we're seeing. Let's not forget, the small boats are just the end of the process. They've got to cross a whole continent to get to us. And you're quite right to point out that obviously the Western Balkans route is not the main way people are coming in. I would like to see agreements done that the Europeans do more to stop migrants, getting to their shores, firstly, because if they can stop them, they're not going to come here. Because no one's going to take the long route to sea from North Africa to the UK. They do it now by crossing over the short Med hop and then, coming through land in that way. And clearly the Europeans have let everyone down by not being stronger on their own borders. But they're waking up to that. Individual countries are waking up to that. And I think it's good the PM has made a big deal about it and is signing deals with one of the routes, at least, to stop the gangs. But you raise, of course, another important point, which is, the influence of Al-Qaeda and indeed ISIS, both of whom, many people thought were dead. But it turns out, of course, they're not dead. They're ideas that then end up reforming. Once you take your gaze away, once you think they're over, they like the darkness. They like to recreate things. And let's not forget that in Afghanistan, we have a Taliban government who have been, frankly, harbouring, once again, Al-Qaeda within their midst. We've just conveniently decided not to talk about it. But the reality is, as you know, there's been a long-standing alliance between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda is active in Afghanistan. That's where some of the trafficking obviously emanates from. And there are obviously other places as well where other offshoots of Al-Qaeda are operating, and ISIS are doing similar. And so we have to be careful not only of putting money, of course, into terrorist pockets through this process of allowing the gangs to operate, but the other worrying thing is, are they trying to insert operatives into Europe who can then, of course, commit terror crimes on our soil as well? So there's a double reason why it's vital that we understand who is coming into the European continent, where they're coming from, and who is ultimately running the gangs that might be behind this trade.
But before I let you go, Alan, where would you rate our sort of, the traffic lights when it comes to terrorism, our terrorism readiness in the UK at the moment? It's something that we used to have it announced all the time a few years ago, about 10 or so years ago. Now we don't talk about it very much. How perilous is our situation?
It was laid clear by the director of MI5 2-3 weeks ago when he came out on his annual lecture and said, I've got bad news. We've had 47 late-stage terror plots foiled. I think it's since 2017, since the last major terror plot. Now, remember, a late-stage plot is just a stage before the terrorists go out with their devices or whatever they're doing to cause mass casualties. 47, Alex. We've had 20 from Iran, 20 various plots from Iran since 2022. On our soil, okay? We've also had, we know that the Russians are causing, sort of activity on British soil. Their agents are here as well. And we heard, of course, extraordinary stat that 75% of MI5's time is still being occupied by radical Islam and only 25% by the far right, despite there being a steady drumbeat for the last few years that the far right is the problem. Well, of course, we know the far right is a problem, but it is not the problem, is it, judging by those stats? So we have been very lucky. Very lucky. We have to praise intelligence services because they have got lucky every single time. okay, and they've foiled 47 late-stage plots. But you and I know that it only requires one of those plots to get through one time, and we have a mass casualty event on our hand. Are there people out there who want to do it? Yes. Are they being stopped at the moment? Yes. Could that change any given moment? Unfortunately, yes. So I fear that we will face something in the coming years where one will get through, and then we'll have obviously the repercussions of that to deal with.
Wow, Alan, it's always amazing talking to you. Alan Mendoza, Dr. Alan Mendoza of the Henry Jackson Society.